Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I am walking you through the process of dyeing fabrics with rosemary. You're going to need a mordant if you're using a cellulose fiber, but we are using protein fiber and we're still going to use a mordant in order to help the color bind better, faster, and be more color fast. I'm weighing out my materials, both silk and wool, in order for me to figure out how much mordant I'm going to need. When you are using a mordant with silk, you heat your water to about 140 degrees in order to use your mordant. While that is warming up, I'm going to clean my fibers first. In order to prepare your silk, you need a gentle soap. If you don't have a specialty soap, you can also use Dawn dish soap. You want to remove any oils or anything from the processing so that your dyes can adhere to your fiber better. So I'm just going to give it a quick wash in the sink and wring it out, rinse it out. You want to make sure that all of those suds and any residue is completely cleaned off before you move on to the next step. I'm also doing my wool in the same bath as well. It's not as necessary, but I find that doing this prepares the fibers best so that it takes the dyes in the most vibrant way possible. I've rinsed off the wool. It's just going to drip while I'm preparing the mordant bath, and I am just rinsing the silk as well. I found that preparing large batches of silk or wool by cleaning them and using a mordant with them first makes them prepared for any dye bath that I'm going to do, whether it's that day or in the future. And you can use fabric that you've already used a mordant on for up to 2 years. After that, you'll have to use a mordant again. So I'm just checking the water. You don't want your water to be too hot. You want to keep it at around 140 degrees, and you want to lightly agitate your fibers in the mordant bath for about 45 minutes. I'm using a loom powder, but for my wool, I want to do it in a room temperature bath or a cold bath. You don't want to heat this one up. So I'm measuring out how much I need into this little plastic bin, which is not advisable just because the plastic is not intended for hot water, and I'm only using a little bit of hot water in order to dissolve the alum, which is potassium aluminum sulfate. And into that, I'm adding room temperature water. And then I'm adding my fibers into it and again letting it rest for about 45 minutes. My silk has been in the mordant for about 45 minutes at 140 degrees, so I'm going to remove it from that bath. And in the meantime, I'm going to head to the backyard in order to harvest my rosemary. I have several bushes of rosemary, and even though I cut so much for this dye bath, I still had a lot left over. So I actually did this dye bath twice, and I'm going to show you the results at the end. I think they're kind of surprising. So I'm just going to keep picking until I had just a mountain of rosemary. I didn't measure or weigh how much rosemary I had, but I did use distilled water for my dye bath, and I put in as much rosemary as I could. I wanted a really concentrated dye bath. I really wanted to extract that beautiful green color. And so I let this sit in that warm water. I did not let it go to boil. It just simmered for about 1 to 2 hours. And I checked on the color that was being extracted. And then I also used a test strip of silk just to see how this color might look. Once I achieved the color that I wanted, I strained out the liquid from all of those pieces of rosemary. I found that using both the twiggy part of the rosemary as well as the leaves allowed for a better color fast because of the tannins. I have this rusty spade that I'm going to add to this dye bath to see if I can modify the dye with a little bit of iron, and it didn't really work, but then again, I didn't have exactly the right materials. I tried some iron ferrous from one of our physics lab, And only the parts that touched the fiber really changed the color, and it made it a more muted gray green, and it wasn't really pleasant. But I also didn't really have the right modifier in order to achieve that gray green color. I'm straining all of our dye bath out of my dye pot. We have a lot of dye to work with. I am so excited. I'm pouring the dye back into my stainless steel pot, and to that I am adding my wool and my silk. It does not need to be dried. It's been already washed, and we already did the mordant for it, so it's just wrung out, and now I can add it to my Rosemary dye bath. You can see how quickly the dye holds on to these fibers, but we are going to leave it in here for a long time to really get that beautiful rich color. However, we never get a deep, rich color. What you see here is pretty much what it's going to turn out in the end. I tried to do this twice. I really tried to get this color to be even richer than what I'm expecting it to be, but even though I left it in there for a really long time, this is the color that it ended up, which is absolutely beautiful and magnificent. This gorgeous sort of green chartreuse color in between yellow and green. It's super beautiful. I did expect it to be a little bit darker, but considering how light the dye bath was and how long I actually simmered all of that rosemary, this is actually a pretty good color, but I'm going to give it another try. So I did a whole new dye bath, and I simmered my rosemary for another 1 to 2 hours. I went ahead and I put it back into my dye bath, but this time I'm going to leave it in these mason jars with the water at around 120 degrees or so. And I'm going to leave it in there for a while, but then I'm going to put the entire mason jar in the refrigerator because I'm going to be away for about a week. And I wanted to see if I could cold dye this as well. So it started out warm or almost hot, but not too hot because this is wool and you don't want to shock the fibers. But even though it was in the refrigerator for 5 days and I really expected the color to be even richer and have more depth, it actually wasn't. Through this process, and I also did this with avocado pits and avocado skins, I realized that the heat is really necessary in order to develop the color. There are some dye baths that do better at room temperature or at cold temperatures like black beans, but rosemary really needed that warmth in order for that color to bind and develop. I really liked the way that it turned out, even though our second dye bath was almost the same as the first. It is worth trying a third time and just keeping it at a steady, warm temperature and see if I can develop the color just a little bit more. I hope that you enjoyed this look at dyeing natural fibers with rosemary. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video where you can find more information as well as links to the resources shared in this video. You can find the link to that blog post in the description box below. And if you'd like to see what we're dyeing on a daily basis, you can find me on my website at pepperandpine.com.